The road was a ribbon of ice, barely visible beneath the swirling snow. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but it didn't matter. I had to stay in control. The mountains loomed around me, dark shapes swallowed by the storm. My breath fogged the windshield. My heart pounded in my ears, and I was exhausted. I had been driving for hours, pushing through the worsening weather to reach the cabin I had rented for the weekend. A solo retreat, a break from the noise of my life. Work had been unbearable. My phone never stopped buzzing, and I couldn't remember the last time I had a moment of peace. This trip was supposed to be that moment. A chance to be alone, to think, to breathe. Now all I could think about was the road ahead, or rather, the road I could barely see. My headlights carved out weak tunnels in the whiteout, but visibility was next to nothing. The GPS had already lost signal miles ago, leaving me with nothing but a hand-drawn map from the rental website and my own faulty sense of direction. I checked the clock on the dashboard, just past midnight. Almost there, I told myself, just a little farther. Then it happened. A curve. A sudden patch of black ice. The back tires lost traction, and the car began to fishtail violently. I gasped, yanking the wheel to counter the skid, but it was useless. The car spun, headlights flashing wildly, illuminating glimpses of snow-covered trees, jagged rocks, the distant drop of the gorge. I slammed the brakes. Too late. The front bumper hit the guardrail. For a split second, I thought it might hold. Then came the snap of metal, the sickening crunch as the railing gave way. I was falling. The car tumbled forward, flipping once, twice, weightless for a horrible moment before slamming down, metal screeching against rock. My body whipped forward, then back, my head striking something hard. A flash of white-hot pain, then nothing. A low humming sound dragged me back to reality. At first, I wasn't sure where I was. My head throbbed, my vision blurred, and the world was wrong, tilted, compressed. The air was sharp and icy, biting in my skin, and something heavy pinned my leg. I was still in the car. I sucked in a breath, wincing as pain shot through my ribs. My seatbelt had locked tight across my chest, but it had done its job. I was alive. My hands fumbled for my phone, but when I pulled it from my coat pocket, the screen was dark. Dead. Okay, I whispered, trying to focus. Think. I turned my head, trying to assess the situation. The windshield was cracked, but not shattered. Snow was already piling up on the hood, carried in by the wind howling through the broken driver's side window. My left leg was pinned beneath the twisted remains of the dashboard, my right hand sticky with blood from a gash on my forehead. I reached for the door handle. It wouldn't budge. Panic clawed at my throat. I was trapped. I twisted in my seat, searching for anything useful. My backpack was still in the passenger seat, the zipper half open, my thermos of coffee long since spilled. The emergency flashlight was there, but when I flicked it on, the weak yellow beams sputtered and died. I swallowed, forcing myself to breathe. Someone will come. A driver, a plow, someone. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had crashed in the worst possible place, a deep gorge hidden from the road above. With the storm covering any trace of my descent, no one would see the wreckage. No one would hear me scream. The cold crept in, threading through my layers, settling into my bones. I flexed my fingers, already numb, and tried to shift my trapped leg. Pain flared up my thigh. Come on. I gritted my teeth, trying again. Nothing. I let my head rest against the seat. My breath came in ragged gasps, clouding the shattered window. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent. Then I noticed something. The headlights were still on, flickering, casting dim light onto the snow in front of me. And there, just beyond the reach of the beams, was something dark. A shape. At first, I thought it was a rock, just another shadow in the endless white. But then I saw the angles, the way it protruded unnaturally from the snow, how it seemed almost human. A person, or what was left of one. My stomach twisted. The figure was half buried in ice, limbs jutting out at unnatural angles. The face was obscured, but even from here, I could tell this wasn't fresh. The body had been here for a long time. I wasn't the first person to crash here. And if no one had found them, who was going to find me? Pain was the first thing I felt when I woke up again. A deep, aching pulse in my skull, a sharp sting along my forehead, and a throbbing weight in my leg. My body had stiffened, the cold setting into my joints, making every movement feel slow and brittle. For a few seconds, I was caught in the haze between sleep and awareness, my brain struggling to piece together where I was and why I couldn't move. Then it all came back. The road, the ice, the guardrail, the fall. My breath hitched, a sharp panic rising in my chest. I twisted in my seat, trying to move, but the dashboard pressed down on my left leg like dead weight. My right wrist flared with pain as I tried to push against it, sprained, maybe fractured. My forehead was sticky with blood, dried now, cracking as I furrowed my brow. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to focus, assess, prioritize, act. I wasn't going anywhere unless I freed my leg. And even if I did, what then? I was still trapped inside a broken car at the bottom of a gorge, in the middle of a snowstorm. I had to get someone's attention. First, the horn. I shifted my weight, my fingers stiff and clumsy as I reached for the steering wheel. My first press was weak, barely making a sound. I gritted my teeth, pressing harder. A sharp honk echoed into the silence of the canyon, quickly swallowed by the wind. Again and again, each honk was met with nothing but the howling storm. No responding voices, no distant headlights flickering through the snow above. My pulse quickened. Try the lights. I reached toward the dashboard, fumbling with the switch. The flickering glow of my headlights brightened slightly, but they were dimmer than before, casting only a weak glow onto the snow ahead. The battery was dying. I flipped them on and off, hoping the movement might catch someone's attention from the road above. I imagined a plow driver squinting through the storm, noticing the faint, flickering lights below. But the gorge was too deep. The angle was wrong. No one could see me. A scream clawed its way up my throat. I let it out, loud and raw. Help! The wind stole the word, shredding it before it could travel. I screamed again, and again, until my voice cracked and my throat burned. Nothing. I slumped back against the seat, chest rising and falling in frantic, uneven breaths. No one was coming. Not tonight. Maybe not for days. Hunger. Thirst. The realization hit me hard. My stomach felt hollow, my mouth dry and tacky. I had eaten hours before the crash. A gas station sandwich, long since digested. How long had I been out? A few hours? Half a day? I reached for the glove compartment with my good hand, wincing as I yanked it open. A half-empty water bottle, a granola bar, slightly crumpled. Pathetic, but it was something. I unscrewed the bottle cap with shaking fingers and took a careful sip. The water was ice cold, burning my throat on the way down. I rationed myself, forcing slow swallows before capping it again. The granola bar took more effort. My fingers felt like they didn't belong to me, clumsy and weak, but I managed to peel it open with my teeth. I took a bite, forcing myself to chew even as my jaw ached from tension. It was dry, bland, but I ate it anyway. I glanced at my phone again. Still dead. No service even if it wasn't. How long before someone realizes I'm gone? A few days at least, maybe longer. I had told my coworkers I was taking time off. I had told my sister I'd be at the cabin, that I needed to unplug to clear my head. No one would expect to hear from me. Not for a while. The thought made my stomach twist. I needed a plan. I needed to get out. I shifted in my seat, gritting my teeth as I pushed against the dashboard with all the strength I had left. My trapped leg screamed in protest, the pain sharp and electric. I pushed. I pulled. I strained. Nothing. Tears burned in my eyes. The cold was creeping in faster now, numbing my limbs, making everything feel sluggish. I needed to stay awake. Keep moving. I turned my gaze outside, past the cracked windshield, toward the snow-covered gorge. And then I saw it again, the dark shape just beyond the reach of my headlights. At first, I convinced myself it was just a shadow, a trick of the light, maybe a broken tree or a jagged rock, something natural and unremarkable. But now, I could see it clearly. My breath caught in my throat. It was a man, frozen solid, His arms were splayed out at unnatural angles, one shoulder partially buried in the snow. His clothing was tattered, stiff with ice. His face, oh God, his face was twisted in an expression of pure terror. Mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide and glazed over, frost clinging to his lashes. I recoiled, my body pressing back against the seat as if I could somehow retreat from the sight of him. He had been here for a long time, long enough to freeze, long enough for the elements to claim him. No one had found him. No one had saved him. I wasn't the first person to crash here. The realization sent a sharp, paralyzing fear through me. And if no one had found him, who was going to find me? The man in the snow wasn't moving. Of course, he wasn't. He was frozen solid, his limbs stiff, his skin pale and waxy beneath the layers of ice clinging to his face. But something about him felt wrong. I couldn't stop staring. Who was he? How long had he been here? His clothes were old, ragged and torn in places, stiff with frost, but not so ancient that they disintegrated in the cold. He could have crashed here last winter, or the one before that. Maybe longer. But if that were true, why hadn't anyone found him? A fresh wave of panic swelled in my chest. No one had found him. Would anyone find me? I forced myself to look away, to focus on something, anything else. I needed to keep my mind steady, keep my breathing controlled. But the moment I turned my head, my pulse spiked. Because I swore, just for a second, he had been farther away before. I squeezed my eyes shut. You're imagining things. The cold is getting to you. The panic. I turned back, forcing myself to stare at him again. Still there. Still frozen. Still staring. My body trembled, though I wasn't sure if it was from fear or the cold seeping deeper into my bones. The heater had died along with the car battery, leaving nothing but the sharp bite of the night air pressing in from all sides. My fingers were numb, my breath shallow. I had to move. I had to get out. I gritted my teeth and tried shifting my leg again, pressing my palms against the center console to push myself up. Pain shot through my thigh like a bolt of electricity. I gasped, collapsing back against the seat, sweat breaking out on my forehead despite the cold. I couldn't do this. I was stuck. No one was coming. The sky above was turning darker, the last traces of light swallowed by the thick storm clouds rolling in overhead. I had no sense of time. It could have been early evening or the middle of the night. The only thing I knew for sure was that I was getting weaker. I forced another sip of water, rationing what little I had left, and tried to steady my breathing. You just need to last until morning. Maybe the storm will clear. Maybe someone will see the wreckage in the daylight. But as the wind howled through the gorge, I heard something else. A noise that didn't belong. A shift in the snow. A crunch. I froze, barely breathing. It could have been the ice settling, the weight of the storm pressing down on the gorge walls. But my mind latched onto something far worse. It sounded like footsteps. I turned my head sharply toward the frozen man outside. He was exactly where I left him. But for the first time, I noticed something I hadn't before. The snow around him looked disturbed, like something had been dragged. A shudder crawled down my spine. I tore my eyes away and pressed my forehead against the cold window, trying to see past the dim glow of the headlights. Nothing but white. The storm was relentless, a thick curtain of swirling snowflakes swallowing everything beyond a few feet. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, that the corpse hadn't moved, that there was no sound except the storm. But the wind didn't make me feel watched. I closed my eyes. You're just tired. It's the stress, the cold, the isolation. I would sleep, just for a little while. I had no choice. I let my body sag against the seat, forcing my stiff muscles to relax, my breathing slowing. My eyelids were heavy, my thoughts slipping away. Then I heard it, scraping, a long, deliberate scrape against the side of the car. My eyes snapped open, my breath catching in my throat. For a long moment, I didn't move, didn't blink. My heart slammed against my ribs as I turned my head, slowly, so painfully slowly, toward the windshield. And I stopped breathing entirely. The frozen man's face was inches from the glass. I screamed. His mouth was open in a silent, frozen wail, his lips cracked and blue. Ice clung to his eyelashes. his pupils glazed over with a milky haze of death. He hadn't been this close before. He hadn't moved before. I was gasping, my breath fogging up the glass, my mind spiraling into pure animal panic. How? How? I squeezed my eyes shut, shaking my head. This isn't real. It can't be real. But when I opened them again, he was still there. And this time, I saw the scratches. Deep, jagged gouges in the frost-covered glass. Right where his fingers should be. I choked on my own breath, my hands shaking so violently I could barely keep them still. I wanted to move, to run, to escape, but I was trapped. Trapped in the freezing wreckage with no way out, no one to help me, and a dead man clawing at my window. I slammed my eyes shut again, pulling my coat tighter around me, willing myself to wake up from whatever fevered nightmare this had become. Just sleep. Just make it to morning. The storm will clear. It'll be okay. But as my mind slipped toward unconsciousness, I couldn't help but wonder. I lost track of time. At some point, night and day stopped meaning anything. The storm had settled, leaving behind an eerie silence that felt worse than the howling wind. It was a suffocating, all-consuming stillness, broken only by the occasional groan of shifting ice. I didn't know how long I had been down here. Hours? Days? The cold had seeped so deep into my body that I barely felt it anymore. My limbs were numb, stiff, my stomach a hollow pit of gnawing emptiness. No food, no water, no rescue. I was dying. I knew that now. My fingers fumbled weakly along the floor of the car, searching for something, anything. I'd already eaten the granola bar, already drained the last drops of water from the bottle. My body was failing, my thoughts slower, heavier. Think. There has to be something. I reached under the passenger seat, my frozen fingers brushing against something solid. My heart leapt. With the last bit of strength I had, I pulled it out. A can. My vision blurred as I turned it over, struggling to focus on the faded label. An old energy drink. My hands shook as I popped the tab. It was warm, syrupy, metallic tasting. Probably expired. Probably poison. I drank it anyway. The sugar hit my bloodstream in a slow, sluggish wave. Not nearly enough to restore me, but enough to keep my body moving a little longer. I kept searching. Shoved deep in the center console, I found something else. A candy bar, rock hard, frozen solid. I had to break it into pieces with my teeth, letting it thaw in my mouth before I could chew. It tasted like dust, but it was food. For the first time in hours, days, my stomach stopped aching. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. My gaze drifted outside. To him, the frozen man. He wasn't the same. The ice that had clung to his body was melting, his skin damp and dark in the dim light. I stared, my breath catching in my throat. Why was he thawing? The air around me was still frigid. The snow hadn't melted. The world was still locked in ice. So, why was he different? I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my forehead against the steering wheel. My thoughts were unraveling. The hunger was breaking me. He's dead. He's just a body. That's all. I kept repeating it in my head, over and over, until I forced myself to believe it. Until I forced myself to look away. I had to find a way out. I turned, my stiff muscles groaning in protest as I reached for the door handle again. I yanked it hard, ignoring the sharp pain in my wrist. It moved, just an inch before stopping. Something was blocking it. I peered through the window, trying to see past the layer of frost. The snow was piled higher than before, pressing against the car like a frozen tomb. But that wasn't the only thing buried in the ice. I saw something else, something new, a second body, a woman half submerged in the snow just beyond the car. My breath caught in my throat. Her hair was frozen in stiff clumps, her face barely visible beneath the frost. Unlike the man, her body wasn't twisted in terror. It was still, serene, almost like she had simply laid down and let the cold take her. A new, horrible thought took root in my mind. This place is a graveyard, a place where the lost are forgotten. I wasn't the first. I wouldn't be the last. My vision blurred. The edges of my world swam, darkening at the corners. I was too weak, too hungry. I wasn't going to last much longer. My gaze drifted back to the frozen bodies outside, to their skin, to their flesh. A shudder ran through me. No! I clenched my jaw, shaking my head, trying to rid myself of the thought. But it wouldn't leave. My stomach twisted violently, a sharp, unrelenting hunger clawing at my insides. I had to eat, or I would die. And in the end, wasn't it all the same? My lips parted. My breath fogged against the glass. I swallowed hard, my throat dry and aching. And I looked at them again, really looked at them, and I wondered, did I have a choice? The search team arrived in the gorge 3 weeks too late. It wasn't their fault. No one had been expecting her. No one had realized she was missing until her sister called, asking why she hadn't checked in from the cabin. Even then, it took days before anyone thought to search the roads. The storm had buried the wreckage beneath thick layers of ice and snow, hiding the twisted metal from the world above. But when the sun finally rose, and the first signs of melting revealed something unnatural in the landscape, someone had called it in. Now, a team of 5 trudged carefully down into the gorge, following the jagged path where the car had crashed through the guardrail and tumbled into the abyss. They weren't prepared for what they found. The car sat partially crushed between 2 large boulders, its windshield webbed with fractures, its roof caved in from the force of impact. Snow had swallowed most of it, but the driver's side window remained visible, its surface marred by deep, bloody scratches. "Jesus," one of the rescuers muttered. They moved in closer, shining their flashlights through the broken glass. She was still inside, a woman, frozen stiff in the driver's seat. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, her lips cracked and blue. Ice clung to her eyelashes, her skin waxy and lifeless. Her hands, God, her hands, her fingernails were torn, some missing entirely. Blood had dried in streaks down her fingers, frozen into blackened lines. The rescuers exchanged uneasy glances. The scratches on the window. Had she done that? Had she been trying to get out? One of the men took a shaky step forward, leaning in for a closer look. Then he saw her mouth, and he recoiled. Jesus Christ. Her lips were slightly parted, revealing teeth stained red. The others hesitated, waiting for some kind of explanation, but there was none. None that made sense. She ate something, another whispered. They looked at each other, then at the car, then at the snow outside. And that was when they noticed it. The bodies were gone. The rescuers had read the report. The missing woman had mentioned seeing something in the ice. A man, frozen solid, staring at her through the windshield. But there was no man here now. No sign of any bodies at all. Just an empty expanse of snow, untouched, undisturbed. Except, one of them raised a hand. Tracks. A single set of footprints led away from the wreckage, winding their way deeper into the gorge. The prints were uneven, erratic, as if whoever had made them had been stumbling. The team followed them in silence, their breaths fogging in the cold air. The tracks continued for yards, then miles. Then they stopped. Abruptly, the footprints simply vanished, as if the person who had made them had been swallowed by the ice. The rescuers stood there, staring at the empty snow. No sign of a body, no sign of struggle, nothing, as if she had simply ceased to exist. The gorge had taken her, just like it had taken the others, just like it would take more, because no matter how much time passed, no matter how many storms came and went, no matter how many people disappeared, the gorge always kept its dead, and it was still hungry. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.